Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Comic Book Wednesdays. This is an epic, world's finest collaboration between Michael K. Vaughan and myself, where we talk about comics every Wednesday, because Wednesday is the day when new releases come out. Michael picks the book that we will do every week because he started off as a feature on his own channel, talking about Marvel's epic collections, their full-color paperback reprint line. And I just horned my way in. But it's a bit of nostalgia for me, of course, because I still have not put my local comic shop, my LCS, back on my walking route. It went completely out the window. I had a 1-2 punch delivered to my just living in the world, my real life in the world. It suffered a 1-2 punch for a better part of 2 years. I had 2 dogs who were old and sick, very sick, and they slowly aged and sickened together, and they at one point together reached a point where they weren't just sick, but they were ailing. They were on the long, slow decline towards dying, and I knew that about them, and the worse it got, the less I liked leaving them at all. Certainly not for gallivanting around on fun errands. And that concern had no sooner gone away than COVID struck, which also meant that I wasn't gallivanting around on errands. And those two things, that 1-2 punch did a number on my routines, my walking around routines. They've only now started to reestablish themselves, right? I mean, if you're wearing a mask and you're socially distancing and you've got your shots and your booster shot, you're doing as much as you can to protect yourself and everyone else. You can't just stay indoors, hiding away from the world, if you've taken all the precautions that the world currently affords you. But I still haven't, even though that is true, even though I've still managed to go out for errands, I haven't added my LCS back to my routine. If it weren't for Mark Richardson and his long-suffering wife going to their own LCS to get comics that I want and that I pitch a fit for, I wouldn't have touched a comic in years. Once upon a time, I lived for new releases. I lived for the new release day of weekly comics. Whenever I wasn't traveling, whenever I was in the country, I lived for those and used to love lots and lots of superhero comics. There's barely anything currently being published by Marvel or DC that I would read with a rifle to my face. Most of it, the stuff that I have unwisely got, is so bad. Just so bad. But there are diamonds in the rough here and there. There are characters that I like to follow. And one of my favorite characters in Marvel Comics is Thor. Stan Lee, the impresario who kicked off the modern age of Marvel Comics, had the bizarre, weird, wonderful idea to make the Norse god of thunder a superhero. Put him in a kind of superhero costume and just bring him to Manhattan, have him fight villains. It worked. Thor had a rocky start, one of the rockiest starts of any of the canonical Marvel characters, but once the character hit his stride, oh boy, did he hit his stride, for me anyway. And that's the book that Michael picked last time. He did a video of his own on it that I'll leave a link to it down below. The latest Epic Collection, which is Ulik Unchained. It is Thor, and it is Ulik Unchained. This is what the Epic Collections look like. They're nice, generous paperbacks full of full-color reprints. You get the cover, you get the artwork, you get anything connected with it. And this collection is Thor number 217 to number 241 and Hercules one-shot from Marvel Premiere. The reason why the Hercules one-shot is included here is because Hercules is included in these issues. He is part of a misunderstanding that happens early on, where the Asgardian Odin and the Asgardians see a horrifying video footage, a deep fake, as it were, of a little goddess named Krista being abducted by the Greek god of the underworld, Pluto. And they see a vision of this that has Hercules right by Pluto's side. And once Thor gets back to Asgard and learns about this, he takes off for Olympus right away to confront Hercules. As Michael points out in his video on this collection, the Thor in these issues is not particularly bright. He's impulsive, dim-witted, and extremely violent. He heads off to Olympus to confront Hercules and fight him, even though a small child would know that it is not Hercules, that Hercules, of course, did not do that. Thor gets to Olympus and finds Hercules there. just having a leisurely glass of wine. Also, that would not be true if he were hanging around in the underworld with Pluto. He would be there. He wouldn't be on Olympus. It should be, of course, the occasion for a conversation between the two. Instead, it's the occasion for a knockdown, drag-out fight. That is the first thing that I want to show you. The first thing that I want to show you about the knockdown, drag-out fight is a rarity. It doesn't often happen. The great artist, John Buscema, who is the artist throughout this collection, with a couple of exceptions where Rich Buckler takes over, but usually it's John Buscema, and he's a great artist. One of Thor's greatest artists. It pained me a little. In his video, Michael said that John Buscema might be his favorite Thor artist, unless the prize goes to Walter Simonson. And I'm sitting there watching his video the whole time saying, Jack Kirby? What about Jack Kirby? But Buscema is a great interior artist. He's usually terrible as a cover artist. His covers are usually awful. And usually they're only used because he could do them quick. So if you can't get a great cover artist to do your cover art, like Gil Kane, for instance, or if Gil Kane does a rare stinker, then you can use a Buscema cover and, no harm, no foul. But every once in a while he does a great cover. For instance, since we're talking about Thor, the cover to Silver Surfer #4, where Thor fights the Silver Surfer. That cover is simple but beautiful. Just fantastic. Also, the cover to the Fantastic Four issue where the Thing fights the Hulk. We've already seen that. That was a simple, basic John Buscema cover. Same thing for this. Thor 221 is Thor versus Hercules. Thou hast dared to challenge Hercules, and so must die. Kind of a weird sentiment. Everybody who challenges Hercules dies. but that is a great John Buscema cover. Why that is not the cover of this volume, I have no idea. Instead, it's this Rich Buckler monstrosity, where the background characters are barely even sketched in. It does not bear examination. And if for some reason you want to use a Rich Buckler cover, the cover of the issue immediately after this one is a Rich Buckler cover that's fairly good. Why not use that instead? But no. Instead we get this horrible thing on the cover. But Thor goes to Olympus to fight Hercules. Just starts bawling out his name to fight him, and they fight. It's a terrific fight. But even as a wee lad getting this from the dry goods store in small town Iowa, it still confused me. The fight still confused me. Not only why it was happening, why is it happening? Why are these two fighting? They're lifelong friends. For all we know, in this issue, they've been friends for thousands of years. Why would it take so little to make Thor call off half-cocked and fight this guy? But also, when I was reading this issue for the first time, I have this issue in the closet. That it's barely holding on, but it's still around. I got to this panel. What is happening there? You've got a great, impressive sound effect, but what are the two of them hitting? What are they hitting? Where did their fists go? What is happening in that panel? I don't understand it at all. Even now, after all this time, I don't understand it. But Thor and Hercules clear things up, and they go to Pluto, and they fight Pluto, and they beat him. And they also fight the Dread Destroyer, who will be familiar to those of you who are not comic book fans, mainly because he's the villain in the first Thor movie. And that first Thor movie, Thor beats the Destroyer in about 5 seconds. And that is not true in the comics. In the comics, the Destroyer is virtually unbeatable. And has been since his original appearance. I bought that original Thor king-sized issue and thought, wow, that's amazing. Once again, even then, way back then, when Michael K. Vaughan was a wee little tadpole, I bought the Destroyer's first appearance in a king-size Thor, what would later become annuals. Terrific issue with art by Jack Kirby, scripting by Stan Lee, in which we learn that the Destroyer is an indestructible suit of armor that Odin made against the end times. He made it to fight Asgard's enemies, and he made it unstoppable. The spirit that you need a person's spirit to inhabit it. It can't move on its own. But once they do that, then they're good to go. Except that it takes, again, a small child to ask, well, what if the spirit of a bad guy inhabits it? Apparently Odin didn't think that. And had this indestructible thing just lying around, just waiting to cause trouble. But Thor and Hercules fight the Destroyer as well. And they also encounter a character named Firelord, who is, it turns out, a herald of Galactus. The epic signature Marvel baddie who will probably be the accumulate up to it villain in the next phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In the first stage of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that I loved so much. They're building up to Thanos, a character who's death obsessed and who was created by Jim Starlin. It looks to me like maybe the germ of a big plot line in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the next installment will be Galactus. And Galactus is a character created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby who eats planets. His origin in Fantastic Four 48, 49, and 50, a long, long time ago, spun originally from Stan Lee simply wondering what would happen if the Fantastic Four fought God. Simple as that. He clothed it eventually in all sorts of science fiction particulars. But Galactus comes to Earth because he regularly eats the life force of planets in order to survive. Galactus does what Galactus must to survive. Stan Lee goes out of his way to tell us that Galactus is not evil. He's just hungry. He has nothing against the Earth personally. And Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four drives him off. In those 3 issues of the Fantastic Four, Galactus is presaged by his original herald, the Silver Surfer. And the Watcher, a near omnipotent alien being who's forbidden to interfere in the events that he observes, wants to warn the Earth that Galactus is coming. He wants to hide the Earth. He first fills the sky with rocks in hopes that the Silver Surfer will be deceived and not know that this is a living planet. He fills the sky with fire, again, hoping that he will deceive the Herald of Galactus. It doesn't work. Galactus shows up, and Reed Richards has to show him the door. In the early Fantastic Four issues, those were not shared continuity Marvel stories. Stan Lee was writing everything, but he wasn't usually thinking to cross over anything with anything else, which in the original Galactus stories creates a gigantic loophole. Surely the Avengers would care if a gigantic alien being showed up and wanted to destroy all life on Earth. They don't. They don't appear. They don't fight Galactus. The X-Men, Magneto, all the villains on Earth would also have all the reason in the world to fight this guy, but the Fantastic Four fight him alone. And he is defeated and leaves Earth. And he shows up again in a very unmemorable appearance in Fantastic Four. Years later, he shows up again, this time with a different herald. A character called Gabriel, who seems to be an angel, seems to have fiery wings and can walk on air. But it turns out at the end of that appearance by Galactus, which is just dumb, we've talked about it on Epic Wednesdays already, it turns out that Gabriel is an android. He's a robot. Firelord is a living being who has fiery hair and a fiery staff and a penchant for fire. And is a cool design. But at one point in these issues, Thor and Hercules have no love for Firelord. They fight him first before they team up with him. And they tell Galactus, and Galactus says, well, he has to come along on our adventure because of all my heralds, he has been the most faithful. Even when I read that back in the 70s, I thought, wait a minute. Well, why wouldn't you just make another robot? So what if your first Gabriel was destroyed? Why wouldn't you make another one? They can't betray you. And you were betrayed by the Silver Surfer, so why wouldn't you just keep making androids? But B, he was destroyed. Your robot was destroyed by the Fantastic Four, and the Silver Surfer betrayed you. So are you saying that Firelord is the most loyal of all your heralds, meaning the Silver Surfer? Or have you had other heralds? Stands to reason that Galactus would have had lots of other heralds. Either way, Thor and Hercules team up with Firelord because he summons Galactus to Earth. And Thor at first thinks, well, I'll just fight you. Thor has fought Galactus before and won. He thinks, I'll just fight you. But Galactus tells him, no, I actually came here to seek your help. I need your help against Ego, the living planet. And while they're sort of confabbing with each other, once Galactus has made his presence known to Earth, and naturally all of Earth is terrified. They think he's back to destroy the planet. And Thor reverts to his human guise of Dr. Donald Blake and talks with Hercules. Why he does this, I have no idea. Why Donald Blake has Thor's memories, I have no idea. Why he would transform into his human variety, he says, so that we can talk without drawing attention to ourselves. Well, okay, you've got a 6'5" Greek god standing in your office. I think the drawing attention to yourself ship has sailed. But it's a very interesting thing. Again, when I read these issues originally, I thought about this. We have Dr. Donald Blake in his office talking to Hercules. Nice artistic choice there on Buscema's part to shadow his face. And Donald Blake he recaps Galactus' original appearance in those issues of the Fantastic Four. And he says something very interesting. He says, there isn't a person on Earth who doesn't remember that day, the day the sky turned to flame, golden fire that stretched from horizon to horizon. Well, yes, that's true, but does that mean you remember that, Donald Blake? We were told that Donald Blake was created by Odin as an empty human vessel to teach Thor humility. That he would be yoked to this being who was not a real person, unlike Billy Batson, right? for Captain Marvel, an orphan who says the magic word and turns into Captain Marvel. Billy Batson was a real person, and so was Captain Marvel. They just became joined together. That is not true with Donald Blake and Thor. Donald Blake is not a real person. He was made by Odin. So how long was he on Earth before Thor showed up? Thor was already on Earth when that Fantastic Four story happened. Is Donald Blake, is he remembering it? Was he frightened? Why didn't he turn into Thor when that happened? Why did Thor only encounter Galactus years later in his own book? It was very interesting in a nerdy kind of way. but the reason why Galactus comes to seek Thor's help is because of Ego, the living planet. Again, a character you may be familiar with from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He appears in the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie. He's played by Kurt Russell, who chews the scenery, no pun intended, really well as the living planet. Ego is, as advertised, a sentient planet, a sentient world. And Galactus comes to Earth to tell Thor and Hercules that he needs their help because the living planet is mad. And there you have Rich Buckler drawing Ego and in the standard iconography of someone who's insane in the old days of Marvel Comics, where one of their eyes will be bulging and one will be squinting small. And that's supposed to mean I'm insane. Buscema uses the exact same visual iconography on Thor's brother Loki a couple of times in this collection to show that he's insane. That's how you know somebody's insane. Because one eye's big like this and one eye's squinting like that. Galactus tells them that the living planet is mad and that they must help him to defeat the living planet. And over in Asgard, Thor's father Odin is watching everything. And Thor's beloved, Sif, says to him, well, what happens if Thor dies? He almost died the last time he fought Ego, the living planet. And Odin says, well, I'm not going to interfere, but if he dies, I'll sure be mad about it. But it turns out that as Galactus tells his story about his encounter with Ego, the living planet, notice Ego in the flashback is not the iconography of crazy. He does not have one huge eye and one little eye. He looks fairly calm. There's Galactus showing up, taking a little cube out of his spaceship, and talking to Ego. And you see Ego attacking him, but what does Galactus say first to warrant that attack? Let's read it, shall we? I stand against you, Ego. I who can move worlds. I, Galactus, who must live whatever the cost. Do what you will, I will not turn back. Will not turn back from what? Let's clarify. Galactus wants to eat Ego, the living planet. Ego isn't doing anything. He's minding his own business. Galactus wants to eat him. And Ego fights back. He will die before the might of Ego. He fights Galactus off. He fights him back. Galactus has to run. Never had I felt such power, never had I felt such rage. It equaled, no, surpassed my own. Before Ego, I had become no more than a dust mote. And for this, the one greater reason, I did at last turn away and suffered Ego's echoing mockery. Our powers are too evenly matched. Any battle between us could only result in the destruction of us both. I must find someone whose strength may offset Ego's might, being with the will and force of a god. You, Thor, it is for this that I sent Firelord to Earth. Apparently his own volatile temperament conveyed a far different impression of my desires, and for this I am truly sorry. Again, let's clarify. Galactus went to Ego to eat him. Ego fought back, drove Galactus away. Galactus came to Earth. For some reason, he doesn't go to Asgard and ask for Odin's help. Instead, he comes to Earth and asks for Thor's help to go back and kill Ego so that Galactus can eat him. So I want to point out that the living planet might be mad, but he's not insane. I might point out, let's get back to that classic picture. The living planet is mad and with totally just cause. And in the end, Thor agrees not only to help Galactus, but to simply murder Ego. He and Firelord and Hercules get all the way into the center of the planet, to the living planet's brain. Again, an idea that was lifted onto the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And Thor is about ready to destroy the brain, to take a hammer to it, just kill Ego. When Ego casts into Thor's mind his own origin story, how he became the living planet. Not by accident. We have to assume that he's doing it in order to gain sympathy with Thor, who he once knew and liked. please don't kill me. Here's my story. I am not evil. Galactus wanted to eat me. But it doesn't work. Thor is about to strike when it turns out that while Thor and Hercules and Firelord were distracting Ego, Galactus attached a gigantic engine to one side of the planet to push Ego away, to drive him away into unknown space. So I guess Galactus doesn't want to eat him anymore. If he can't eat, maybe he likes to dine in solitude. Look at the look on Ego's face. He's ripped. He's being pushed away. I would be too. A weird story. And it just blends into another story where a creature that dwells in darkness on Earth abducts Hercules and terrifies him with demons. And this creature has extended its mental tendrils throughout all of Manhattan, causing people to kill themselves. Rather graphic. One person after another, we see ordinary people decide, well, he promised me life after death, so I will kill myself. One of those people is Jane Foster, the human nurse that was Donald Blake's love interest and Thor's love interest. She tries to kill herself as part of that wave. Thor goes to down into the ground underneath Manhattan with Hercules. They fight this thing off and eventually come to a pat decision that it's really their own fears embodied. Well, their own fears embodied didn't cause people to kill themselves. And the thing is never heard from again. Nothing's ever done with that again at all. It was totally mystifying. And I was mystified all over again while I was reading these issues. I've reread these a million times. But this Epic collection fixes some problems. The old Marvel Masterworks hardcover volumes that reprinted these issues fixed these problems too. The original issues had problems in this run. One of them, where Thor fights a gigantic superpowered caveman, that original issue was mispaginated. If you paid your 25 cents to buy it on the newsstand and you were just flipping the pages, it wouldn't make any sense. You had to go back and sort of piece together where the pages had been done wrong. And that was fixed. Fans howled in protest, said, if you're going to ever reprint this, fix that. And that was fixed for the Marvel Masterworks volume and is fixed in this volume. Same thing with this panel here. I might point out a great Gil Kane cover. Thor versus Camothron. Doesn't ever actually happen. Hercules defeats Camothron on his own. But it's a great Gil Kane cover. Why isn't this the cover of this issue instead of this dumb Rich Buckler artist? No idea. But when this issue starts, Thor is lamenting. He's feeling sorry for himself. And out of anger, he punches the top of the roof, sending rocks cascading down on the unsuspecting pedestrians below. And he hurls his hammer in order to smash all the rocks to smithereens. But when this issue originally came out on the stands, and I paid my 25 cents for it, in this panel, Thor had no pants on. The colorist flesh-colored his pants instead in that panel. Somebody had to fix that. And those fixes, there are a number of those, and they happen all throughout here. And that's great. But the title of the book comes from the troll Ulik. This is called Ulik Unchained. It comes from the troll Ulik, who is an old Stan Lee, Jack Kirby character, the strongest of the trolls, Asgard's ancestral enemies, who, when he approaches Manhattan this time, he attacks Manhattan, he captures Jane Foster so that he can coerce Thor into doing his bidding. And the bidding that he wants Thor to do is to help him overthrow the king of the trolls, Gerudo. He wants to overthrow him and take control of the troll kingdom himself. Thor has no choice but to help him, because Jane Foster is his hostage. But eventually, Jane slips away from them, and Thor doesn't have to help them anymore. And he defeats Ulik rather easily. Just pounds him into the water. And apparently he drowns. He never gets back up. He shows up again, so he's not drowned. But he doesn't just stand up and say, well, that was a good punch, and then punch him back. Then he defeats all of the other trolls. And then he takes the magic spear that the trolls are using and causes it to cause an explosion in the troll kingdom. And he grabs Jane Foster and flees, while the trolls all burn to death, screaming for him to help them. And he doesn't. Trolls should rule where trolls belong, is what he says, and just lets them all die. Lets them all burn to death. Now, Ulik doesn't die. He doesn't show up again in this collection, but again, when I read that originally, I was absolutely horrified by the ramifications of that. That is not the act of a hero at all. And there's another plot line that goes throughout the end of these issues, and that is that we see Odin wearing bib overalls in California. where he calls himself Orin, and where the normal people in California don't know anything about him. They know that he can't remember his past. He seems not to remember anything, but they also know that he's incredibly strong. He's got his super strength and is invulnerable. And he is eventually kidnapped by the gods of ancient Egypt. So we've been to ancient Greece, we go to ancient Egypt. Osiris, Isis, and their son Horus abduct Odin in order to mind wipe him even further and imbue him with the atom force, this energy force that they can use to defeat their enemy Set, the god of death. And it makes for good issues. One half of the issues they're all drawn by John Buscema, but they're inked by Joe Sinnott, who is a great inker. For Buscema, he really brings control and epic quality to him. But it raised a number of issues. It raised a number of issues. If you have this power just lying around that you can use to defeat Set, why don't you use it yourself? Why do you need Odin to do it? And if you need him to do it, how do you know the power's even there? Who owned it originally? And what happened to them? But more than that, why is Odin in California in bib overalls? Why? Why is he there? Apparently not remembering anything about his past. Well, we're told why. Thor goes to Asgard, and Odin's chief advisor tells him that Odin up sticks and left. He put a spell of forgetfulness on himself to duplicate the spell of creating Dr. Donald Blake in order to imbue Thor with humility. That's what we're told in the issue. That's why Odin did it. He put a spell of forgetfulness on himself and sent himself as a mortal to Earth in order to duplicate the experiment of giving an arrogant immortal a sense of humility. And again, any 5-year-old will be able to point out the problems with that. Number one, if you are doing that in order to give yourself a sense of humility, giving yourself a forgetful spell will totally annihilate that. You won't remember what you're learning that way. And on top of that, it doesn't give him a sense of humility. He no sooner comes back to himself than he's yelling at Thor for being in love with a mortal woman. It doesn't change anything about his personality. If anything, it makes it worse. But reading this again this time, I was concentrating on something else. Odin is the king of Asgard. He's the ruler of an entire realm. And he decides to leave his throne without telling anyone and without even knowing himself that he's done it? That is the height of irresponsibility. That is just weird. It is a weirdly unlikely thing to do. And reading that, plus all the rest of the stuff that I've described in this long diatribe, rereading this epic collection brought home to me a thing I don't like to think. I don't like to think it at all. When I've reread these issues, I've mostly been concerned with the gorgeous artwork and the epic moments. There are epic moments all throughout. But rereading these issues also brings home one thing really strongly, and it's a thing that I've encountered many, many times before. I ought not to need reminding of it. And that is that Jerry Conway, the author of all of these issues, is a really bad writer. He's a really, really bad writer. He has his moments, now and again. He's good with little moments, and every once in a while he writes a bigger plot that doesn't have gaping holes in it. But usually not. Usually not. Usually he's just this bad. And that's a shame. It's a shame to look through these things and remember that the problems that are forcing themselves on you are all because he didn't think out what he was doing even for a second. And that's the only reason why they're happening. So there'll be good threads running throughout here. Sif, the goddess Sif that I mentioned, sacrifices her life to save Jane Foster. That is great. But why does Jane Foster need saving? Why did she try to kill herself? Because of a concept you came up with and then dropped without examining it in any way. Why is Hercules so ineffective as a sidekick? He's as strong as Thor. Why is it that he constantly needs to be outdone by Thor in circumstances where he wouldn't? He would be able to last against the Destroyer as long as Thor would. And so on and so forth, culminating for me probably in that weird bit about Odin deciding to just quit being Odin. Not just quit being king of Asgard, but quit being himself. With no idea when he'll ever return. Even he doesn't know that. And his nearest advisors don't know it. It's not like he tells his son, you have to be regent while I'm gone. He doesn't care about his kingdom at all. And when that episode, now to make it worse, when that ancient Egypt issue is over, we're explicitly told that although he does not think of himself as Atum Re, he does not think of himself as an ancient Egyptian god anymore, we're explicitly told that he doesn't really remember much about who he is. He's going to go back to ruling Asgard? It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Really, really bad stuff. In addition to lots of other little details, really, really bad writing. That is the marring feature of this epic collection, is that it's bad writing. But it's still humdinger fun to reread Thor. That just lots and lots of fun. No idea if that fun will carry over to next week. Michael is back in the driver's seat. He made an original tag today instead of doing comic books, but next Wednesday he will be back, and he picks. He calls the tune. We will see what he picks. Will it be good? Will it be awful? He made mention in his own video of wanting to explore Thor's back catalog in 2022. That'd be fine by me. I know that back catalog like the back of my hand, but there'll be lapses along the way, I'm sure. You'll be the first to know. We'll reconvene next Wednesday. I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.